to my channel. I'm so glad you stopped by today because today we are going to be making an armored polar bear. I thought this would be a lot of fun, plus with the weather getting colder I was more in the mood to make some more winter type creatures. And I also have been kind of messing around with making armor and different accessories for my creatures, and I thought this would be a cool creature to do that with. Anyways, let's get started. Okay guys, so the first thing that I'm going to work on for our polar bear are going to be the clay pieces. So I'm going to start on the head and then we'll work on all the feet. So for the head, I'm going to do like I normally do. I'm going to take my glass container, I'm going to take a lump of tin foil. It's roughly shaped into the shape of the head that I need, and then I'm going to completely cover this in clay. I'm going to blend it together and try and get a basic shape for the head, and then we can start adding details to it. Now, I wanted to use glass beads for this because the eyes are really tiny, but I ran out of black beads, so I'm just going to be making them out of clay. I actually haven't done this in a long time. So, for the eyes, I'm just going to take some balls of clay, I'm going to lay them out where I want them to go, and then I'm going to start adding some strips of clay underneath and over them to make the eyelids. I'm going to use my tools to straighten up the lines and make sure that they're nice and even, and to mess around with them to get a good expression. Honestly, these are probably a little bit too large, but I'm okay with the eyes being just slightly larger. I think it will make it look a little cuter. After I got the eyes in place, I realized I needed to adjust the shape of the head a bit more. Now this time around, usually I add clay to adjust the shape of the head, but I didn't want to make the head larger, so what I'm going to end up doing is kind of scraping it away and adjusting it that way. So I'm going to be removing clay to shape the head instead of adding it. I'm mainly going to do this on the sides of the muzzle and then a little bit underneath the head because I just have too much clay there. After that, I'm going to take a strip of clay. I've got a really long, thin piece. I'm going to lay the strip across the face, cut it to fit, and then I'm going to blend it upwards and downwards because I want the upper lip and the bottom lip to stick out just a little bit, kind of about the same, but I didn't want to use separate strips. So I'm just going to do this to make that spot of the face lift up a little bit, and then I'm going to use my tools to indent where the mouth is going to open. So I'm going to separate the lips using my tools. I'm going to make sure that my lines are nice and straight and even, and then I'm going to move on to making the nose. For the nose, I need the snout to be a little bit more pointed, so I'm going to add a little bit more clay to the end of it and blend that in. Once I have the basic shape laid down, I'm then going to define the shape of the nostrils. So I'm going to use my tools and make some holes and then just kind of finish up the detail of that. Now normally with my clay heads, I don't tend to make my ears out of clay, I tend to make them out of felt and add them on later, but I felt like sculpting them on, especially since the bear ears are going to be so short, I don't have to worry about them being very fragile, so that's usually the main reason that I don't sculpt my ears, is I don't want them to be super fragile, but since these are going to be nice and kind of stubby, I'm not going to really worry about that. And basically what I'm going to do to make the ears is I'm just going to take some lumps of clay, they're even amounts, push them into the face where I want the ears to go, and then just adjust the shape of them using my tools. I'm going to try and make it look like the ears do have an opening, so I'm going to kind of frame the inside portion of it, and then add a bit of a fur texture to the backing of it. After that, I'm going to clean up the edge around the base of the head and just make sure it's nice and smooth, and then I think we're just going to add some texture here and there to the face. Now I'm going to try something a little bit different to see if I can get the fur to blend better. And basically what I'm going to do, since I already added a fur texture to the back of the ears, I'm going to add a fur texture around the eyes as well. That way when I add the actual fur trimmings to the face, it can kind of blend into the texture of the clay. So I'm just going to add a little bit of line work here and there under the eyes and a little bit over the eyes. And then once I have the texture on the face and I like how everything looks, I'm going to put this in the oven at 275 Fahrenheit for probably about 45 to 55 minutes. It's not too large of a head, but I do want to make sure that it bakes all the way through. Okay, so now we're going to work on the clay feet. So the clay feet are going to need a wire frame. I made a very simple one where it has 5 digits. Each foot is going to be basically the same. The front are very similar to the back, so I left the wire frame the same for each. So what I'm going to do first is I need to start covering up the wires. So I'm going to start where all the wires are combined, take a large lump of clay and just cover the whole thing. I'm going to blend it together and make sure it's covering all the wires so that they're all nice and locked together. And then after that, I'm going to start adding some claws to the ends of the wires. So I want all my claws to be the same size, so I'm going to make some even amounts of clay, just tiny little balls, all the same size, and then I'm going to add them to the tips of each wire. And then I'm just going to use my fingers and I'm going to pinch it until I get a nice point. I'm going to do this to all of the wire frames, and then once I have all of them covered, all the claws in place, I'm going to put these in the oven for a pre-bake. So I'm just going to bake them for about 20 minutes at 275 Fahrenheit. And then once they're out of the oven and have cooled to touch, we can start working on the rest of the foot. Now here's where it's going to be a little bit different, because normally with my feet I tend to do the bottoms first and then do the tops. Well, this time around I'm going to be doing the top first and then move on to the bottom. And the main reason for this is this time around the bottoms of the feet are where all the detail is going to be. So I'm going to have all the paw pads and stuff, and then the tops of the feet are going to be furred. So there really isn't any sculpting detail, just a basic shape that I need to get done. So I'm just going to cover the top of the foot with a nice amount of clay to make sure that the foot isn't flat, and then I'm going to kind of divide the toes a little bit. So I'm going to get that done, and then once I have the tops of the feet done, I'm going to do a pre-bake just like we did with the other parts of the feet at 275 Fahrenheit for probably another 25 minutes. We're going to wait till that's out of the oven and is cooled again, and then we can start on the bottoms of the feet. For the bottoms of the feet, I'm going to roll out some thin layers of clay and I'm going to cover the bottoms of the feet. So this is just going to cover up so we have a surface to work with. I'm going to cut it to fit, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my tools to add a bit of a fur texture around the base of the foot. Similar to how I'm trying to make the fur blend into the clay around the eyes, I'm going to try and do the same thing with the feet. So I'm going to add a bit of a fur texture first, and then I'm going to take some balls of clay and I'm going to make the paw pads. So I'm going to lay out little balls of clay here and there where I need the shape of the paw pad to go, and then I'm going to use my tools to blend it into the rest of the clay. I'm going to adjust the shape of it and just make sure that it looks correct, and then we'll add a little bit of a texture to it. Once I like how the bottoms of the feet look, I'm going to put our feet in the oven for one final bake at 275 Fahrenheit. This time around we're going to do 45 minutes. Okay, now that all of our clay pieces are done baking, they're nice and cool, we can start painting them. So even though our clay is kind of white, it really isn't white, so I'm going to take my white paint and I'm going to primer everything first. So I'm going to primer the head, I'm going to make sure that's completely dry, and then I'm going to start adding some colors to it. So I'm going to add a little bit of pink here and there around the muzzle, just kind of adjusting here and there because I do want a little bit of a skin tone to pop through under the fur. And then most of the details are going to be black. So the eyes are going to be black, the inside of the ears are going to be black, and then we also have to do the nose. So I'm going to do the eyes and the ears first, and then I'm going to move on to adding a little bit of gray around them. I'm trying to blend this into the texture that we have for the fur. The main reason I'm doing this is that way we don't have a drastic black to white. I want to have it kind of fade. And doing this will make everything a lot softer looking, and it'll make it also look a little bit more natural. So I'm going to go over that with the gray, I'm going to let the gray dry, and then I'm going to also go over it again with a white to help blend it in as well. And then I'm going to move on to doing the same thing with the nose. The whole body of the nose is going to be black, and then I'm going to start framing around it with a gray, trying to blend it in naturally with the rest of the white. And since I'm already working on the nose and it's really close to the mouth, I'm going to work on that as well. So I'm going to fill the little crease for the mouth with black and try and blend it outwards. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to slowly try and lighten it just to make it a bit more of a gray than a black. Because I don't want the muzzle to be black, I want it to be kind of a dirtier grayish white. So again, I want everything to kind of blend together nicely and be very soft. And then for the feet, I'm going to be doing the same thing. I'm going to primer them a nice white color, let that dry. I'm going to use pink on the bottoms of the feet just a little bit because I want some of that to peek through as well. Not a lot of it will, but I just want a tiny bit. So I'm going to go over the bottoms with pink, I'm going to let that dry. I'm going to then go over that a little bit with a gray and kind of mute it out a little bit because it was just a little bit too pink. I'm going to let that dry as well, and then I'm going to use some white around the edges to blend everything together. And then for the paw pads, I'm going to go over them with a nice black. I'm going to do the same thing for the claws as well, that way they stand out. And then once I'm happy with all the painting, I'm going to let everything dry. I'm going to then mix up some resin and apply it over everything that we have painted. For the face, it's just going to be around the main details. I'm not going to be resining the whole head. And same thing with the feet, I'm going to be just doing the bottoms and the claws. Now resin takes about 24 to 48 hours to dry, so I'm going to set these aside somewhere safe, that way nothing gets on them or bumps them, and then I'm going to let those cure overnight while we work on some sewing. Okay, so this is the pattern that I'm going to use to make our polar bear. At first when I was making this, I thought I needed to make the chest of the polar bear a lot larger, but after looking at more references, I realized that the back portion is a lot larger than the front, so I did have to adjust for that. So I'm going to use this and get all my fabric cut out, and we're going to start sewing everything. So first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take the left and right of the body, we're going to sandwich these together with the fur on the inside, and we're going to sew down the front of it. So we're going to do the very top portion. So when we close everything up, it's going to be the belly instead of the back. Then we're going to sew the tail. So I have a top and a bottom for this. I'm going to sandwich these together as well and sew all the way around, leaving the base of it open so we can flip it right side out and stuff it. Once we have that flipped right side out and stuffed, we can then sew it to the end of the bear's body. Next thing that we're going to do is we're going to take the fabric for the legs. So each leg has an inside portion and an outside portion, and we're going to sandwich these together and sew down the fronts of all of them. So we're going to do the same thing to the front and the back legs. After that, we can start putting everything together, and our clay pieces are ready for us to use as well. So I have a very simple wireframe that I put together, and I'm going to add the fabric for the body over this. So I'm going to figure out where I need the wires for the legs to come through, and I'm going to cut some holes and slide this over the wireframe. I'm then going to take our clay head and I'm going to glue it to the wire for the neck. And then once that's dried, we're going to take the fabric for the neck and start gluing it around the base of the head. Now my polar bear's head ended up being a little bit too large to have the fabric go all the way around, so I'm going to have to fill the gap with a little triangle of the fur fabric. So I just cut this to fit, and then we'll have to sew it in place after everything's dried. And then after that, we're going to stuff the body and close everything up. Once we have everything closed up, we're going to take our hair trimmer and start shaving the sides of the bear. Now most likely I'll have to go over the body a little bit more after we add the legs, but I'm not sure how short I want the fur, so I'm mainly going to be shaving the sides, that way it's easier to add the legs onto the body. Once we have the sides nice and shaved, we're going to take the fabric for the legs and start sewing them into place. So we're going to do the same thing with the front and the back. So with the legs, you're going to take the under portion of the legs and sew it under the wire. And then you're going to take the outer portion of the leg and you're going to sew it over the wire, kind of closing up the wire inside of the leg. Now you'll want to take your time adding the fabric for the legs because we don't have a guide to where we need to sew them, so you'll need to make them nice and even by kind of guessing and just double checking what you did with the other leg on the opposite side. So usually I'll do the front legs, and then once I have the front legs done, I'll do the back legs. And then after that, we're going to take our clay legs and we're going to add them to the wire frame. So I'm just going to take a 20 gauge wire and I'm going to wrap the wire that's on the back of the clay legs onto the wire for the wire frame. We're going to get all 4 of those nice and secure, and then we can take our fabric glue and we can start gluing the fabric for the legs around the bases of the feet. We're going to let that dry a little bit, and then we can stuff and close up the back of our legs. Once you have all of your legs stuffed and sewn closed, we can then take our hair trimmer again and start going over them. So I'm going to go over all of the legs, adjust the fur, and then if I need to, I'll adjust the fur on the rest of the body to go with it. Okay, so the legs are almost done, everything's all shaved, and now we need to start furring the tops of them. So I'm going to leave it pretty simple. Basically, I'm going to take a piece of paper, I'm going to lay it over the foot and kind of trace it to get an idea of what I need to cut to fit that. And then I'm going to take the same fur fabric that we used for the body, and then I'm going to cut pieces to fit on top of the feet. Now before I glued them on, I did use the hair trimmer to go over them and shorten the fur, just because it was going to be easier to shave them before I glued them on top of the feet. And then I just took some fabric glue and I glued them in place and I let them dry. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the face. I'm going to cut some fur fabric pieces to fit. I'm not going to shave them. I'm going to wait till after I have them glued onto the face. That way I can blend the fur into the rest of the body. And then I'm just going to glue them into place where I need them, let them dry, and then we're going to start furring the rest of the face with fur trimmings. So I'm going to lay out some fabric glue where I need the fur trimmings to go, and then I'm going to sprinkle them and kind of push them into the glue, use my tools to adjust them where I want them, and then I'm going to leave that to dry. After it's dried, you'll want to brush away any fur that hasn't stuck to the glue. Okay, so the polar bear is basically done, so if you didn't want to do any armor or anything, you're pretty much done right now. But I wanted to make a little bit of armor to go down the back of him. Nothing really fancy, just something to kind of decorate him a little bit more. So I'm not sure if I'm going to use everything here, but I have some gems I want, I have some scale mail, and I also have some fake leather. So I cut a piece of fake leather to fit on top of him and kind of drape over his shoulders, and I'm going to start sewing my scale mail onto this. My idea with the scale mail is to kind of frame the piece with the black scale mail, and then to have the rest of the metal scale mail the body of it. So I'm going to sew these into place, and then to clean up the edges, because the top of the scale mail have those holes, I'm going to take another piece of fake leather that I cut to fit, and the edges of them are kind of like jagged, and I'm going to glue this on top of the piece. And then I'm going to take the gems that I want to use. I think I'm just going to use the one, and I'm going to glue it right in the middle. So I'm going to let my fabric glue dry a little bit, and once it's dried, I'm then going to take some chains, and we're going to use these to add the armor to the bear. So I'm going to add the chains to the fake leather in the front of the armor. I'm going to put the armor on the bear. I'm going to crisscross the chains underneath, and then I'm going to connect the chains onto the back portion of the armor on each side. Okay guys, and that's how I made a armored polar bear. I had so much fun with this project. I love messing around with the armor and the accessories, so if you guys have any other ideas for creatures that I could do that with, let me know down below in the comment section. I love getting your guys' ideas because sometimes I just pull a blank and it really does help when I'm running out of ideas. Anyways, I'm going to have him along with a bunch of other creatures in my Etsy shop, so if you guys want to buy anything, check the links down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!